All right. Now I have the pleasure to introduce our featured storyteller, Kiran Rana. And Sally and I first met Kiran through Stagebridge, as so many of us here have that Stagebridge connection. And I think everyone who meets him from the first realizes that this is a very special person, but we might not quite understand why. But when you start asking Kiran about himself and you discover that he is a senior Sufi teacher in the Sufi way and that he's been involved with Sufism for 40 years and more, that he can do music, he does theater, he does storytelling, he brings his whole self to everything he does in the most creative and powerful way. And we've had him as our featured teller before, and we are so happy to have him back today. He tells personal stories sometimes, and he also loves traditional stories, especially the stories of that trickster Nasruddin. And I think he may have a story about him for us today. So please let's welcome Kiran Rana.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you so much. So it's sometime in the 2000s, and a phone call is taking place between the Bay Area and the Old Country. Nasruddin's nephew, Nasiruddin, has been in the US for 2 or 3 years, and he suddenly made it big in the tech world, and he's begging his dear uncle to come and visit. Come for 3 or 4 weeks. No, come for 2 months. No, come for 3 months. Nasruddin is interested, but says he can't. He can't afford to go, and his wife doesn't want to go, and he won't leave her behind. No, of course not, the nephew says. We will pay, and she must come. He talks to his wife and then to his aunt, and he urges her to come. She says, Nephew, I am used to my home. I do my cooking, I shopping, buying vegetable, working garden. A few days away, not problem. But weeks? Oh, maybe I feel I'm bossed by niece. I speak something not nice. I know come. The loving nephew, totally supported by his loving wife, they promise Aunt and Uncle Nasruddin everything. Their own home, with a garden, new or old home appliances, daily shopping at a nearby market, and the clincher, a regular visit to IKEA. Mrs. Nasruddin is dancing and chanting, IKEA, IKEA, as she agrees. Nasruddin has followed the negotiations. He has a couple requests of his own. Nephew, he says, I want to drive on your big American nothing pay way. His nephew says, no problem. I'll pay for driving lessons before you come. When you're here, we'll rent a car. Nasruddin says, oh, wonderful. Well, can I also have a small computer? Nephew says, Uncle, of computers here there is no end. Just like that, the deal is done. Both sides are happy. And a few weeks later, the Nasruddins arrive in the USA. So let me interrupt for a moment. I want to thank Liz and Sally and Tailspinners for this invitation and for the opportunity to share story after a long time. Also, today is Holocaust Remembrance Day. So let's take a moment to remember this almost unbelievable betrayal of the human spirit. So, have all of you heard of Nasruddin? here's some background. Nasruddin is an almost mythic character, and to some he's a wise man, and to others he's a fool. He seems to live in many places at the same time, and some people find him easily, and some people don't find him at all. His stories appear in literary and oral traditions from the Middle East and Arabia to Russia, France, even China. Some call him Mullah, others call him Hoja. I like to call him Uncle Nasruddin. And sometimes I call him the Nasruddin. In the Sufi tradition, to which, as Liz said, I belong, Nasruddin is often a disguised teacher. Mostly he brings attention to behavior that models what we now call cognitive biases. In the older cultures, it was called the old villain. And it's the kind of thinking that is responsible for many errors, conflicts, misunderstandings. Now, I'm probably going to run a little over time, but I want to mention this. Elon Musk recently listed 50 cognitive biases that he wanted taught to kids in schools. Things like the self-serving bias and the streetlight effect and the bandwagon effect and the halo bias and the naive effect, and a big one these days, which is the Dunning-Kruger effect. And you might want to look all this up. Anyway, Nasruddin's stories show how biases trap us, and if you can figure out what they are showing us. And in the stories I'm going to tell now, maybe you can see if you can tell what biases are at work. So back to the Nasruddins and their visit to the USA. When Nasruddin and his wife arrive at immigration in SFO, an agent stops him and says, "Sir, you must identify yourself before we can let you in." Nasruddin turns to his wife and asks for her pocket mirror. And he looks carefully into the mirror. Says, "Oh, yes, definitely, Nasruddin." Eventually, though they get through immigration, they're greeted warmly by the nephew and his wife. The new house is darling. Mrs. Nasruddin loves it. There's a store of food. The younger woman explains how everything works. There is dinner waiting. The Nasruddins are tired. And right after the nephew and wife leave, they get into a warm bed and fall into a deep sleep. Thus begins their visit. Nasruddin's nephew and wife really like the old couple. They want to show them everything. Soon after they arrive, they go on a picnic to Tahoe, on a trip to Tahoe. On the way there, they stop at a big meadow for a picnic lunch. They're having a nice lunch. And from a distance, there floats a hot air balloon with a man in it. As it gets near them, the man shouts down, "Excuse me, can you tell me where I am?" Quickly, Nasruddin replies, "Well, you're about 15 meters above the ground." The balloonist is taken aback, then says, "Thank you. Are you a spiritual teacher?" Nasruddin is very proud. He says, "How did you know that?" The balloonist says, "Well, because what you've told me, while true, it's quite useless." Nasruddin smiles back. He says, "Aha, you must be a spiritual seeker." Now the balloonist puffs up with pride and says, "How did you know that?" He says, "Well, because you're lost and you want to blame me." Now we all know Nasruddin wants to drive on the nothing to pay ways. His nephew gives him a few tips, and then says, "Uncle, just go for it." So Nasruddin is driving down the middle of the 580, which is near their home, when his mobile phone rings in its hands-free cradle. Try saying that 3 times fast, hands-free cradle. He voice activates the phone, and his wife's voice comes on and says, "Nasruddin, I hope you are drive careful." "I always drive careful," says Nasruddin. "Why are you so worried?" "Well," she says, "I am listening radio news, and they are saying that on No Pay Way, where you are driving, there is one idiot driving wrong direction." "My dear," says Nasruddin, "there isn't one idiot. There are hundreds of them." Anyway, as Nasruddin gets familiar with the computer, he falls under the spell of social media. He reads on Facebook that most travel accidents happen to people within 2 miles of their home. One morning, his wife comes down from bed, finds him busy on the computer, surrounded by newspapers and maps. "Wife, get ready. Get ready, wife. We are moving." "But I love this home," she says. "Don't worry," he said. "I have found the perfect match, exactly like this home." "But for what then we have to move?" she says. "See, wife, it says right here. It says most accidents happen within 2 miles of the house. We are going to move 3.5 miles from here to new house." I don't know if they ever moved, but anyway, one evening Nasruddin comes back from his nephew's home. The wife has stayed on there to chat with some friends from the old country. Soon it gets dark. A group of people returning from the movies see an old man searching the ground under the lamppost in front of the house. They introduce themselves and say, "What have you lost?" "Well, you see, I have lost my keys," says Uncle Nasruddin. They start to help him look. After a while, someone says, "Well, can you give us an idea of where you might have dropped them?" "Oh, yes, I dropped them in the house." Then why are we looking for them out here?" "Well, you see, the electrics went out in the house and it is too dark to look there, so I came out here where the light is." It's a street light effect. One day, Nasruddin's nephew, Nasir-ud-Din, is called to serve on a jury. The order is addressed to Mr. N. Uddin. Nasruddin says to his nephew, "Let me go, my boy, let me go." And soon the older man is sitting in the jury box of a case of robbery with violence. The prosecutor paints a vivid picture of the crime with much detail. Almost before he's finished, Nasruddin is exclaiming, you are right, he did it, no doubt. But then the defense attorney speaks soberly, sternly, showing that the defendant couldn't have done it. He's a person of good character. Nobody saw him near the scene of the crime. He has 2 cats. Nasruddin, again agitated, shouts, Of course, you are right, he is innocent." At which point the judge, a sober man, says, "But Mr. Uddin, they cannot both be right." To which Nasruddin says, Yes, absolutely, you are right." So Nasruddin, he grows to like wandering around the Bay Area. One day he wanders into MoMA in the city, and the old man loves what he sees. He loves it, and he starts to draw. Now he has an unusual and original imagination, and his mix of calligraphy and stylized portraiture becomes locally famous. Soon, with his nephew's contacts, he is able to exhibit. One day, a man from his country wanders into the gallery. The two greet each other warmly. After a while, the man asks, "May I ask what you are doing here?" Nasruddin explains. "Oh," says the man, "you are the famous artist Nasruddin?" "I have that honor," Nasruddin replies. "Well, one question. Why don't you paint things the way they are?" asks the stranger. "And how is that?" inquires Nasruddin. "You know," said the man, "how they really look." "I am afraid I do not know what you mean," responds Nasruddin. "Like this," says the man. He pulls out his wallet and he extracts a small passport-sized photograph of his wife. "This is my wife. This is the way exactly how she looks." "I see," said Nasruddin, taking the photograph in hand. "I see. She is very small and quite flat." After a few weeks, Mrs. Nasruddin decides she wants to go for belly dancing lessons with her niece-in-law. Without them, Nasruddin starts to hang out at Starbucks. But he finds his reputation as a wise man catches up with him there. And he spends a lot of time answering questions about people's problems, about life. That he doesn't want to give up his daily 4-shot, 2 raw sugars, dry cappuccino. So one day he puts up a large notice. Questions answered. 2 questions, $100. For the first couple hours, nobody bothers him. Then eventually, a local citizen walks up and says, "Say, brother, ain't $100 just a bit expensive?" "Yes," replies Nasruddin. "Yes, I suppose it is. And your second question?" So, like in the last story, friends of Nasruddin's nephew have met him and ask if he will help them. They have a small boy who bangs a drum all day, and he loves every moment of it. He will not be quiet no matter what anyone says or does. His parents and neighbors have called various people to get help with the situation. It's not working. The first advisor tells the boy the noise will damage his eardrums. The child is not a doctor. This means nothing to him. The second advisor tells the boy, "You see, for some people, drumming is a religious activity done only on special occasions. The child is not a priest and he's not a scholar and he doesn't care." The third advisor offers the neighbor plugs for their ears. They are not happy. The drumming does not stop. The fourth advisor gives the boy books to read. And he looks at the books, and he looks at the drum, and he chooses the drum. "I'll read later," he says. The fifth advisor gives the boy meditation exercises that will make him calm and quiet. Soon the boy discovers that he really enjoys drumming during his meditations. The sixth advisor gives the neighbors books on a method of controlling their anger through biofeedback. Enough said. Nasruddin comes to the couple's home and meets the boy. He is a bright, alert, energetic, charming boy. Nasruddin thinks for a while. Then he walks out to the tool shed which he passed on the way in and comes back with a hammer and chisel. He goes over to the boy and sits down beside him. "You know, boy," he says, "have you ever wondered? Well, have you ever wondered what is inside this drum?" Soon after this incident, Nasruddin dreams he is talking with God. And he is complaining. "Lord, why is it that so many unworthy and shallow people are given much comfort and pleasure, but I, praying faithfully, am poor and feel insignificant? In the world I feel insignificant." "Ha ha 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 ha. That's easy," replies the friend. "When the shallow pray to me, I get tired of hearing their voices pretty quick. I fulfill their wishes, so they stop praying. But you, Nasruddin, you are mischievous, you are entertaining, and I find your voice as sweet as honey. By not granting your wishes, I get to hear your voice for a longer time. And I get to teach and guide you. I keep you close to me. And that is your deepest wish, isn't it?" That same night, Nasruddin realizes he has been missing the deep talks he has with the friend when he is in his home, in his village. Soon after that, Mrs. Nasruddin and he go home.
Thank you, Kiran. Nasruddin is not the only one whose voice we want to keep hearing and is like honey and something sweet and something nurturing, nourishing, and to from laughter to profundity. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz.